We're live. Hello, everyone. Welcome to BrigadeCon 2015 and a panel discussing Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition. It's just this niche game that not a lot of people know about, so we thought we'd cover it to get us some
It's an
exposure.
indie, isn't it?
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
like an
I don't
indie
even know.
game.
I don't know who made it, but
Yeah,
we're gonna cover it
some
today. We're
guys.
gonna we're gonna cover it for the first year, kind of a retrospective look at it. Um, my name is Kirk. I run this channel that you're on, PhD&D, and I'm joined by two people who need no introduction. That's the classic line. Um, Matt from A Fistful of Dice and Mike from Sly Flourish. Why don't you guys go ahead and introduce yourselves? We'll start with Mike.
Introduce myself. Um, let's see. I run the website slyflourish.com. I've been running that since the beginning of the fourth edition of D&D. And I've been running a Twitter account called Sly Flourish where I've been posting daily D&D tweets, something like, I don't know, 15 or 1600 tweets since then. And I've written a few books. The most popular is The Lazy Dungeon Master. The one before that was Sly Flourish's Dungeon Master Tips. I try to focus all my stuff around making better dungeon masters, including myself. It's mostly self-help to make me a better dungeon master, hopefully. And I've been playing a lot of 5th edition D&D, so I'm eager to talk about it.
Very nice. Matt, go ahead.
Yep, my name is Matt. I run the channel A Fistful of Dice, and I'm also one quarter of AbsoluteTabletop.com. I have been having a great time at the con today, and I'm really excited to be talking about 5th edition, which is probably my favorite edition of Dungeons & Dragons with these two gentlemen here. So, yeah, pretty psyched.
Awesome. So we'll get started just with, I think we're going to go through and each of us will tell you kind of our history, maybe with D&D, like just mentioning the editions we've played, but more specifically, what have we done up to this point with 5th edition. So I'll start just real quick because mine's probably shorter than your guys's. I started actually with 4th edition, Dungeons & Dragons. That's the first one that I'd actually ever played. I've played some 3.5 now. I've played like Pathfinder, along with some other games, but we're still technically in like a 4th edition game that's just kind of never ending because we can't meet very often with that group. But we've switched over. I've been running a 5th edition campaign now for probably 3 months, and I've been playing in one for close to 6 to 8 months, I think. But we've done quite a few one-shots with my groups, and we play-tested through the entire play-test as well. So we've been pretty heavy with it through this first year, but I'll let Mike tell you. I think he's played a little bit more.
Yeah, I was trying to look through. I actually keep records of when I do stuff, and the hard part is because 5th edition came out in the middle of last year, I don't really know. I know I've played over 100 5th edition games, or run over 100 5th edition games, and I've played in not nearly as many, maybe a couple dozen at best. And that doesn't really include the playtest. I also played a lot of the D&D Next playtests from the time it was a private beta all the way through, whatever they called it, friends and family playtest, all the way through to its final release, and Gen Cons and Winter Fantasy when they ran it there, and lots. So I've been playing a lot of 5th edition D&D. Before then, I played a lot of 4th edition D&D. I've had a solid weekly D&D game that's been going on now for about 6 or 7 years. We started a little bit with 3.5 right at the end, and then moved to 4th edition. Played a 1 to 30 campaign in 4th edition. Then played some smaller campaigns in 4E, sort of built around themes, so like a Dark Sun one and a Shadowfell one. During the D&D Next playtest, we also played a bunch of 13th Age, so we got a chance to try sort of a fork of D&D, if you will. But yeah, lately it's been all 5th. I'm now running a Sunday game on top of my regular Wednesday game, so I'm playing on about the average of 9 games a month. And obviously I like it, or I wouldn't be playing nearly that much.
And Matt, you run kind of a pretty much unknown online group called the Provokers. So have you
Yeah,
done anything besides that one?
yeah. So Well, I initially started with D&D 15 years ago this August with 3rd edition, and I played 3rd edition 3.5, played a little bit of 4th, mostly Pathfinder, and actually went back and played a little bit of AD&D as well, and for a while I was sort of enamored with Castles and Crusades, which is sort of an OSR kind of take on the 3rd edition OGL rules, and that's a fun system as well. But 5th edition has really sort of captured me and rekindled my love for D&D, and I've been playing it almost exclusively for my fantasy RPGs since it came out, and I kept up pretty good with the D&D Next playtest as well. I thought that was a really cool thing to be able to be involved in, do all the surveys and stuff like that, and kind of see it evolve and grow. And seeing the system it has become has been a real treat as well. And I like that they've continued with the survey aspects and the different playtests for the classes and the different options and things like that. So, and yeah, currently I run the campaign, The Provokers, which meets monthly. We've missed a month here and there, mostly due to me getting married this summer. But that has attracted a little, somewhat of a following on YouTube, and that's a really cool kind of experience that is sort of new for me. And so that's been really fun. And I also play in a 5th edition campaign called The Winds of Sir Celine, and then I'm constantly playing in little one-shots here and there. I try to play with as many different dungeon masters and as many different players as I can, just because I feel like I always learn something. I always learn something from every player and every dungeon master, so I try to have a large pool of people that I like to play with. So.
Very nice. So what is we'll go around, after the first year, since it's been out pretty much for like a year now. I think like the Dungeon Master's Guide, maybe not quite a year, but after the first year, like, what are your thoughts? I mean, we're still all playing it, so I think we all still like it, but what do you like about it, or why are you playing this and not Pathfinder for Matt? And for Mike, why are you playing this and maybe not as much of like 13th Age or 4th edition?
Like, for me, it's weird because I thought I was going to just be Pathfinder until forever, because I was really comfortable with 3rd edition and then 3.5, and then Pathfinder was just kind of a streamlined version of those, and I was totally happy with it until I started playing around with D&D Next, and it was like, I actually like this a lot better. And it was sort of it sort of coincided with a bit of a me sort of looking at how I ran games, how I prepped, how I looked at the game, and it was one of those really wonderful, rare occurrences where the rules and my philosophy of the game just kind of passed each other at the same time, and I was like, oh hey, we're on the same wavelength here. And so 5th edition for me just sort of has this wonderful balance of like just like crunch, just a little bit of crunch to it, but it's just so simple and fluid, and I feel like as a dungeon master, I feel most comfortable running 5th edition. I feel most comfortable making calls just on the fly without having to sit there and flip through a book about it.
And how about you, Mike? Why is this what you're playing still right now?
Well, I mean, I love it. It probably sounds cliche that it feels more like D&D than I'm kind of used to. I really enjoyed 4th. I mean, we played a lot of 4th edition, and what's interesting to me is that 4th edition was a very clear refinement of a lot of the things in D&D. Like when you think about 3.5, and they just kind of made big decisions, like, okay, a lot of people are playing on the grid, so let's just focus on the grid. And a lot of people they wanted this sort of high power game, and it's a very high power game. You start off with tons of hit points, you have lots of abilities right up front. Fighters are doing things that wizards typically did, and then they also said, then let's kind of refine the math and get the math all in the right spot and on the right curve. So that was why it was easy to have a one-page sheet that had all of the stats you'd need to build any monster at any level and know that it's balanced for a party at any level. And there were lots of little spiky bits in that. Weird. You'd have like the Dagger Master Rogue, who's out damaging everyone by like 150% because they crit so often, or you have the Sword Mage, who can basically, movement is no longer a concern because he can teleport to any spot he can see. Little things like that, but generally speaking, the math was all very flat. Or not flat, but there was a steep curve, but it was all balanced. Like the curve was very clear. But then you have 5th edition, and it's what I'm finding, having spent a year with it and really thinking about it a lot over the year, is that they clearly designed it asymmetrically. We were joking before that, kind of talking about the asymmetry of D&D sounds like a PhD thesis, but that D&D doesn't have this nice clean curve of damage output or character power or monster power. It's got all these weird spikes all over the place, and it's easy to look at that and say, well, that's it doesn't work, right? Like there shouldn't be these even spikes. If I have a CR4 creature, that should be roughly the same as every other CR4 creature as far as damage output or armor class or hit points, and they're not. Like the Banshee is far scarier as a CR4 than most other CR4 creatures are. The Beholder, I think it's a CR11 or something like that. Way more dangerous than any other CR11. If you put 4 Beholders in, they're way different than 4 Fire Giants. They're killer. And that it feels like design. It feels like it's designed that way. I think it is designed that way. I think that some of the early discussions that Mike Merles posted talking about the D&D Next playtest was, we don't want everything to be perfectly balanced. It's okay that Fireball is a way better spell than many other spells you'd have at 3rd level. It's okay that they don't all have to be perfectly balanced. And it's kind of taken me some time to come to grips to that. I have friends who play where they haven't come to grips with it. They don't. That it annoys them that they can't kind of balance an encounter knowing that all the creatures of one CR are basically the same as any other creature of any CR. But the way I look is that feels like D&D, because D&D, like 2nd edition D&D, which I played a whole bunch of in high school and in my early days in college, it had all these weird things, and like you were scared of stuff. You saw a Beholder, it scared you. It didn't matter what its challenge rating was or how many hit dice it had. Like the odds of disintegration just went way up. Like it's scary. And so that's coming to grips with that and realizing that that's the design of the game, and it isn't good or bad. It just is. Like that's the way it's built. And I think it's easy. When I forget, somebody quoted that many years ago. People said the problem with D&D is that every DM who runs it is a designer. Like they're all building their own game. They're not just playing a video game. And the designers of DMs are going to look at some of this stuff, I think, and say, oh, that's not right. That's broken. I got to change that, or I got to house rule that. And I've got a whole list. Like I could sit and write at a list right off the top of my head of 10 things I would house rule because I don't like them. But the truth is, it is that way. And they went through a lot of energy to think about whether or not something should be that way. And if you just, in my experience, when I've just been willing to let go and relax and go ahead and let those weird spiky bits show up, it makes for some really interesting stories. And that's been my overall experience. I threw, just as an example, because I bring up the Banshee for a reason, I had a bunch of level 14 characters, like 5 or 6 level 14 characters, so they're pretty powerful. And this is a group that's played together now for many years, and they're all very experienced, and they know how to build characters. They know how to build really effective characters. They're not all crazy power gamers. They do a lot of role-playing and stuff like that, but they work well together. They know what to do. They don't make mistakes. And they went up against, I think it was 4 Banshees, which are like CR4. And I was like, yeah, Banshees sound kind of dangerous. And the Banshees all screamed. And like 4 of the 6 of them dropped to 0 immediately because their Constitution save sucks, right? They don't get a bonus to con saves. They're all like rogues and wizards and stuff, and they don't really put anything to con. They certainly don't have a con bonus. So they they rolled and they lost, and the 4 of them, and the combined hit point total was like 1,000 hit points of damage that these CR4 monsters did. But boy, we're still talking about it now, and they're like, oh my god, if I ever see a Banshee, I'm running. I don't care what level it is. And that makes for an interesting story. We remember that. The other one is the rat swarms, the level 1 rat swarms. I think every group I know that's played Horde of the Dragon Queen remembers those ass-kicking rat swarms right in the beginning that like TPK'd I don't know how many groups. But I asked a group I ran through recently, and they played all of Horde of the Dragon Queen, so they were up to like level 8. And I said, like, what was the most memorable battle in that? And they said, oh, the rat swarms, And I asked my most recent group, who's played that, we're doing Rise of Tiamat, but they're now level 17 or 18. They just had a really brutal fight against a green dragon. I had Storm of Vengeance hitting him, and they had 2 Horned Devils in the same fight. Big, tough fight, multiple people down, multiple death saves. And they won, because our Ranger dished out 180 points of damage, or something like, I don't know, a ton of damage in one round, killing the dragon. And I said, which was harder, that or the rat swarms? And they all said, oh god, the rat swarms. Like this was hard, but the rat swarms, that was terrible. So there's something about that asymmetry that makes for really interesting, memorable stories, and that's something that's taken me a little while to learn. Sorry for the long diatribe.
No, I think that's exactly what we're what we're wanting out of this panel. And I think a good word to describe that sort of that up and down, those high highs and low lows, is like it's dynamic. Like it feels more dynamic. And some people would say, well, that's unbalanced. It's not balanced. But I think there comes a certain point where the pros of being balanced take away from the system being dynamic and feeling like you could get like you were saying, TPK'd by a rat swarm. It's just the way that the game is built. And I think that instead of trying to force the system to not be like that, instead Wizards has sort of used that and leveraged it as a strength of the system. And so to me, 5th edition feels a little bit deadlier, but at the same time, I feel like heroes are more effective. Even though the monsters are dropping heroes more often, I feel like the heroes are dishing out more damage and doing more things in combat to control the battlefield. And so I feel like it's a give and take. For every hero that's dropping, there's somebody that's just doing insane amount of damage with a level 1 spell, and the scaling spells and the ability to cast a spell with a higher spell slot that you got, 5 levels ago, and all of a sudden it's super, super effective. I think it lends itself to a system that makes characters feel useful even at low levels.
Yeah, I agree, and I think so many times when we talk about like the mechanics and how it's built, the numbers behind it, everybody jumps to balance. They jump to like that curve that's supposed to be there, and how that makes for better games. But with these spikes, as you mentioned, like it almost forces you into better stories.
Right.
Because like the Banshee thing, what are you gonna do about that? Like as a player, you're either gonna turn and run is what you're going to do, and that's not mechanical. You're not going to build something that's going to negate that. And coming from 4th edition, which again I liked, but every power, it was just another turn. It's okay, what move are you going to do? It's going to do about this much damage. And so you had to give it so much flavor, whereas in 5th edition, like a fireball, I think was the example you gave. Somebody's like declares that, and you're like, "Oh crap, he's casting fireball! Look out!" Like, and it makes it the actual mechanics themselves that much better. That they're not balanced. They get you into those story moments so much better. I think the Banshee example, I really like that. The fact that you're like, "Oh yeah, CR4. Just took out my level 14 party."
Yeah,
and that
it was killer.
And I think that I wasn't a huge fan of 4th edition. It was one of those systems that I played for a while, and I went back to 3rd edition. I was one of those guys, or I was like, oh, 4th edition. I was like, nah, I'm going back to 3rd edition. But the thing about 4th edition that I really liked was that feeling that everyone could do something cool. Like even the fighter at level 1 could do something cool. You know, he wasn't just attacking every turn with his sword. And I think that they've taken like the best parts of 4th edition and they've made them work in 5th edition. And a great example of that is like the Ray of Frost spell. It's a cantrip that does, you know, a decent amount of damage, but it also takes away movement speed. And that's battlefield control. Like that allows you to, oh, this guy is moving around the battlefield. I'm going to Ray of Frost him and drop his speed by, 10 feet or whatever. Or, I think it's Acid Splash, where you can potentially hit 2 people with it if they're standing close enough to each other. And there's spells that allow you to push people away and pull them towards you. And that's very 4th edition to me. That feels very 4th edition. And so I like that they've taken those elements and made them work in that sort of dynamic system of 5th edition as well.
Yeah,
sure.
Yeah. No, it's really interesting. I mean, I think there's one aspect that at least the most important player in my group, my wife, has brought up more than once, and I think she's right about it. While I think characters get to the point where they're pretty empowered, they don't start off that way. And level 1 is really rough. I still and my opinion is like my big joke is that level 1 to level 2 should be like fighting a couple giant rats and having a couple stern conversations, and then you should be level 2. And then maybe a couple more rats and a couple more stern conversations, and then level 3, and then you're empowered, and then you can go fight stuff. And it's there's a little bit of a shock coming from 4th to 5th, because that the toughness of PCs, it takes a while for that to take off, and because there's these weird, I call them weird, but they're obviously there on purpose. But like the reason why the Banshee was so effective is because these guys who have crazy high attack scores, and like the Rogue has he never gets hit by any dexterity saving throw. Like, he doesn't care how big a fireball is. He regularly gets hit full in the face by dragons. His saving throw is really good, and then when he takes no damage instead of half, so he always walks out, brushing off his jacket. But his con save sucks. His con save is like +1. So, it doesn't matter that he's 14th level, and his complaint is like, I'm freaking 14th level, and my con hasn't changed at all. Right? And I'm like, well, you could have put stuff. He's like, yeah, but then I'm not going to have this other stuff. So there's this kind of interesting, these interesting chinks in the armor of 5th edition characters that I'm not used to with 4th. And the other game I compare it to, because I certainly like it better than 4th as a DM, and now it's a well supported system, and for anybody who loved 4th edition and doesn't feel like 5th has the kind of stuff they want, 13th Age is absolutely fantastic, and 13th Age is that interesting, has that interesting philosophy of design that they refer to as the love letter to D&D. So it's got a much looser connection to D&D than 5th edition does. Like 5th edition has to feel like D&D. It's part of the brand. It's it's their mission. That's their thing. But 13th Age, it doesn't even have D&D anywhere in the title, and they can kind of do what they want with it, but they want it to feel like D&D. And Jonathan Tweet, who worked on 3.5, and Rob Henso, who worked on 4th edition, are the guys that made it. And they, when you think about the good parts of 4E, there's a bunch that went into 5th, and then there's a bunch of other ones that went into 13th Age, and it feels really great. Like, if you want a high power D&D game, the characters in 13th Age are just monstrously powerful. I mean, the joke is, that if you're a high level rogue, I think we had, so their level system is 10 levels instead of 20, but the power level is roughly the same, so a 10th level character is kind of like a 20th. And the 10th level rogue, I think, rolled 16 dice in every hit to do damage. Like between sneak attack and base damage, it was 10d8 plus 6d12 on every one, and it was this giant handful of dice every time. And we finally had to just do the math and average it out and say just roll these 3 dice and then add it onto your 96 points or whatever. But it was interesting to see that fork, and it is, to me, an interesting idea that 5th edition has kind of become the sort of grittier, you got to be careful about what you're going to face, no matter how powerful you are, because you never know. And you're kind of creeping around the corners. Where in 13th Age, you're flying on giant earth motes, and you're blasting down mountains, and your fighter is just cleaving through hordes of creatures. And what I'm very happy about is I have both, right? And I can play both. And we're finishing out our Rise of Tiamat game, and the big question is, okay, do we want to start with Out of the Abyss? And I don't know if you guys have read the Out of the Abyss adventure yet, but boy, you couldn't start in a lower place. Like if you want to feel powerful, that's not the game to play, not initially. And or 13th Age, where you're chasing a living dungeon, right? Like on Eyes of the Stone Thief is their kind of new adventure they put out, and the original nickname of the adventure was Moby Dungeon. It's a giant living dungeon that travels around like a huge worm, and you've got to go hunt it down and kill it. Like those are very extreme paths, and my group gets to decide. All of us get to decide together. Do we want to do one or do we do the other? So, as a player and as a DM, I'm very happy because I have all these options. And I'm glad that 5th edition. I'm glad that WotC decided to take 5th edition in the direction they did, because if it would be a copy of everything else otherwise.
Yeah, and that's something that is not necessarily specific to 5th edition, but just the extreme breadth of styles of RPGs that we have, even in the fantasy RPG genre. I mean, that's just, I feel like we're in like another golden age of RPGs right now, where it's like, if you're into fantasy RPGs, like Fantasy Age, 5th edition, 13th Age, like the Pathfinder, there's just all of these options. Yeah. And then there's this old school Renaissance where you can go and play Labyrinth Lord or Dungeon Crawl Classics if you want that old school feel. And I just feel like that's so awesome. And I totally agree with you, Mike, in that like WotC, I think they picked the correct little niche to go for, because it does have flavors from all of those kind of things. Like it does feel a little bit OSR-y to me, but at the same time, it's definitely a modern game. It doesn't feel super finicky, and there's no weird arbitrary rules to it as far as I can see. So I love that there's all these games out here, man, and I feel like I just don't have enough time to play them all.
Yeah. So now we have all new, first world problems. That
Exactly.
I've got the Numenera box set right upstairs on my on my living room table. It is the most beautiful RPG product I've ever had. I mean, it's just everything in it is. It's just it's like I think they call them in Japan like a bento box, right? These beautiful sort of. The presentation is everything, and that box is gorgeous. And I refer to Numenera as like my 4th favorite of my top 3 RPGs, right? Like, I wish I could play more of this, but I'm playing so much. I'm playing as much as I can imagine anybody reasonably playing and still holding a job.
Yeah.
And I don't know where the hell I'd fit it in. I'm squeezing it in next weekend, so I've got that. But
Numenera is a gorgeous game, and that's also a game that I would love to have more time for.
Yeah, I've picked up just the core rulebook like probably 20 times. Haven't pulled the trigger yet on buying it, but I want to. So with the back to the 5th edition with like the spikes you're talking about and these areas that I think provide, like, you wouldn't normally associate that with consistency, but I think that 5th edition provides a much more consistent game. And coming from 4th edition is where I really see it. Mike, you're going to hopefully get this exactly. But if you're looking for like a Dragonborn like champion or something in 4th edition as an enemy, well, you've got like your level 12 one, you've got like a level 15. It's like a matter of finding one that's tough enough to actually pit against the party. And it's the same type of creature, but there's level 10, level 15, level 20, level 25, like which one do you want? Whereas in 5th edition, I'm going to use the Banshee again. A Banshee is a Banshee. It's going to mess you up pretty much any time unless you have like the one thing that's going to protect you from a Banshee. Like it adds a consistency to me, at least, as a DM, that like, and to players where they know that thing and they know what it is, and it's always going to be that. It's always going to be that dangerous, or have that one trait that's going to actually matter, and not, well, I've got enough hit points that I can walk up to it, I'll come out fine. That's not the only thing.
Yeah, I'd say the thing that I found is as PCs get to higher levels, one of the initial design descriptions of fifth edition was that, well, monsters will always be, potential not lethal, but they'll always be kind of dangerous. And what I'm finding is now there's lots and lots of monsters that are not dangerous. I mean, even at the CR4 level, I bring up the Banshee because it is. But generally speaking, they're not. And most of it is because the armor class of PCs does go up enough that, like, the Orc who's got a +4 to attack and does 1d8 +2 damage. I mean, these guys have 162 hit points each. They're not going to get threatened unless you throw 100 of them at them. And I don't think the system, in the chat, people were talking about minions, bringing a minion system into fifth edition, and people that took the minion idea from 4E and the minion system from 13th Age and putting it into fifth. And it's kind of unfortunate they don't really have a system like that. I mean, there's lots of things, like, oh, I wish it had X, if it only had X, and a lot of times we can come up with it. The nice thing about a minion system is it's easy to implement without really breaking the game anywhere else. You can throw that in there. The idea of hit point pooling. If I've got 100 orcs that are going to attack the PCs, I just multiply the orcs' hit points by 100, and then every time a hit point's worth of damage is taken off, I take one of the orcs out. And that way I don't have to track 100, 100 separate little hit point pools. So really easy to implement. They could have stuck it in the DMG in a little box. They have lots of little boxes in the DMG with little hints like that, and that would have been a nice one to add, and really easy to do. But other than throwing 100 orcs at a group, they're just not gonna take a lot of damage from it. And even with 100, they're like, okay, well, that's like what, 4 fireballs? Yeah, I got that, right? Like, they're gonna take those guys out. The guys that attack with saving throws, like the monsters that attack with saving throws, I think those are the guys who actually end up holding their own better than the other ones do. Straight attack and damage ones don't. But that said, I mean, like, if you think about ogres and stuff like that, anytime you get over probably the first few CRs, an ogre can still dish out a good amount of damage even against high-level PCs. So yeah, that curve is a lot better. You don't have to have 15 kinds of orcs. And that that's certainly nice. And I know that was something they specifically said they didn't want to have in 5e. They kind of had to bend their backs a lot to say, like, oh, well, there's the ghoul, and then there's what's the paragon version of a ghoul? The enraged ghoul, and then we'll do the abyssal ghoul, who's 20th level. And you're like, why the hell is there a 20th level ghoul? Like, what did that ghoul do to get to 20th level? It took me like a whole big campaign to get to 20th level. That ghoul's already 20th level. So, there's definitely an advantage to the way that 5th edition, kind of did that. But then again, you kind of have those weird sort of, if you were to graph actual monster power by CR, you'd see this big zigzaggy line rather than this nice flat thing, which again makes for interesting stories.
Yeah, well, and then I'm the guy that never runs a monster as is. I photocopy the monster manual page, and then I sit there with a stat block, and I sit there with a pen, and I'm like, I'm going to give him full plate armor, and I'm going to give him this and this and this. And I definitely feel comfortable doing that in 5th edition. Yeah. But it's gotten to the point where the CR is just the vaguest of guidelines. Like, I'll look at it and be like, okay, that's about right. Or that's a little high, I'm going to drop the hit points a little bit or whatever. But the thing is that I haven't really run into any issues where something just plows through the players that I wasn't expecting to, or something gets killed right away that I wasn't expecting to. Like, it's all pretty consistent, I feel like. I've
had a couple, and again, they're the ones I remember the most.
Yeah, exactly.
Where I was like, wow, like, really? Holy cow. I mean, just saying, like, well, they're fighting a green dragon, and they all have Hero's Feast, and Hero's Feast prevents them from taking any poison damage, so that removes like 72 points of poison damage breath weapon. So maybe I'll just throw a Storm of Vengeance. Maybe the dragon has cast a Storm of Vengeance, and lightning bolts are crashing down. And I'm like, holy cow, 2 of our PCs are down. They've had 2 death saves. Like, they took death saves from getting hit by 7-point hailstones, right? Like, it was really brutal, and they were almost dead. Like, and these are 17th level PCs. So that was unexpected, I'm like, I'll throw a couple Horn Devils in there. You know, and that's actually that's where it kind of becomes tricky. We have a warlock, not to no one wants to hear about my game, but we have a warlock who has banishment and can I guess he can split it. He apparently can because he did it the other night. And banishment is one of those spiky bits where like it doesn't matter if you're fighting a guy with 9,000 hit points. If he gets hit by banishment, he's gone. If he's a planier beast. If he's you could take the biggest pit fiend, and if he gets hit by banishment, off he goes. And yeah, you could give him legendary resistance and stuff if you want to cheat. But I knew he had banish, and I said, okay, well, so he's got banish, and I know if I put one demon out, that one's not likely to survive very long, and may just disappear completely. So I'll put a second one in. And it actually worked perfectly, that he split his spell, he hit both, one of them failed, one of them saved, and one was gone. And then I was like, hey, I still got one left, and it's okay. But if he had missed, and both of them are still there, that battle would have gone really badly. And it was mostly because I said, I got to put something in there because one of them's probably going to just disappear. One of them's going to get stuck in a force cage or feeble-minded, or, one of the Saver Suck spells is going to work on that one, so I'll put in another one. And that I think can be, it makes it, I guess to me one of the probably the weakest thing about Fifth, which is tied to this whole sort of spiky power curve, is that the encounter building rules just don't work at all. Like they're really, really complicated, and they still don't do the job. And I think that can be it's been a source of frustration for me. I've run enough games that I'm pretty comfortable doing it anyway, but I think it can work early on. I've tried to come up with some simpler systems. They kind of work, but then sometimes they don't. And again, it's because CR isn't exactly real perfect either. So that's probably one of the bigger trouble bits, and probably something that can make it hard for DMs. But is what it is. Right?
Yeah,
we have what we have.
Exactly. It's one of those things where you just have to run it, and eventually you just sort of get a sense for how encounter building works in 5th edition, because like you say, those rules, like I was using them, like when the rules first came out, I was like, oh cool, here's this little thing, and it's like, wow, this is really involved. This is a lot of math, and then I have to figure out, I have
referencing back and forth, like, oh shit, I screwed up. I'm sorry. I hope we can swear. Oh man, I screwed up the multiplier, and now I got to change the number. Oh no, the multiplier changed again.
Yeah, you're like, oh screw it, I'm just gonna throw 15 works at him. Yeah,
6 sounds good.
Yeah, exactly. But it is one of those things where it's like eventually you just sort of get a sense for it, and you figure out, because every party is different too. Right. It's like the CR doesn't account for the fact that you have a healer in the party. It doesn't account for the fact that you have a warlock and a wizard who are both doing just massive amounts of damage with their spells. So it really is like a case by case sort of basis, really.
Yeah, it's very situational. Like little things really matter. I noticed because I used it early on too. Like I was like, oh, this is the method. This is how you do it. And so I go through and build the perfect bandit encounter at level 1, and then a different group of bandits hits them the next time. And it was totally like they just got obliterated, and I was like, these are like the exact same number of the exact same monster, but they had like a surprise round, and they like almost wipe the party.
Initiative, man, affects things so much in a combat.
Yeah, that's true. So there's 2 things. One is you mentioned a trick that I really like, and something that made me, as soon as I discovered I could do this with 5th, I became like a little kid. And it was the idea that you can screw around with monsters by giving them different kinds of armor, or giving them a different weapon, or making them stronger. And it's different than 4th, where you just kind of said, I'm going to add 4 onto their attack score just to shake things up. You never really cared about how the math and the flavor were connected. And that idea of like, well, this orc is strong, so he's got a 19 strength instead of whatever the regular 15 is, so he's going to hit that much harder. And you can do the math in your head real easily, right? And say, oh, 19 to 15 is, what is that, +3? So an additional 3 to attack, an additional 3 damage, and now he's the orc champion, or he's Grognard, king of the orc pit fighters. And it was really easy to do that. Or you just, you take your ogres and you're like, yeah, but these ogres are armored in plate, and now they have ACs of 18 instead of 12, and you're like, oh, that's going to make a difference. So I love being able to tweak monsters by, giving them great swords, or giving them higher intelligence, or it's real easy to do that to kind of shake up, to shake up monsters. I really dig that.
One of my favorite things to do is to just give everything acid flasks and alchemist fire, man. It always makes things
I give a lot of potions of speed and potions of invisibility.
Yeah.
Good way to spice things up.
Yeah, exactly.
So let's spend the next couple minutes. This is a super loaded question, so you should have seen this coming. But what is each of you, your favorite thing and your least favorite? And you may have already covered it, and it doesn't have to be like a specific mechanic. It just can be like, well, I like that you can do this with 5th edition. But let's start with Matt. What is your favorite and least favorite thing from 5th edition?
My favorite thing is Witch Bolt. No,
That's
specific. I really do love Witch Bolt, though. I also, honestly, the Warlocks in 5th edition are. I did not anticipate them becoming one of my favorite classes ever, but they're so fun, and I have a lot of fun with the Warlock. But I think my favorite thing about 5th edition is, honestly, I love the advantage and disadvantage system. I feel like it's one of those things where it's like, why didn't anyone think about this before? Like, it is so. It's such a nice replacement for the endless +1s and -1s and +2s for this and -3s for this. The modifiers of 3rd edition, I just love being able to say, oh, and you got this guy on the ground, so you have advantage, or that person distracted them, so you have advantage, or you're on ice, so you have disadvantage. It's just such an easy way to give your players bonuses and minuses for the different things that they're doing in combat, and it's fun. It's fun to roll the 2d20s and say, oh, I got super high on one and super low on another. So I feel like the advantage disadvantage, it really kind of sums up 5th edition as a whole. Like, that mechanic itself is really indicative of the system, and so that's definitely one of my favorite things about it. And then as far as least favorite goes, I don't really know. Like, there are things about it that I don't super care for, but there's nothing that I straight up just don't like about it. I don't like how in the book they have character creation set up. I feel like it's super weird that you do your class and then you go do your background and you're like, oh, this background gives me these skills. I have to go back to my class and pick different skills because now I'm doubled up on skills, So I feel like the character creation process could be a little bit more streamlined and make a little bit more sense in the book. That's something that kind of immediately stuck out to me when the system was first coming out.
How about you, Mike?
I think my favorite thing is the speed of combat and what that allows us to do with the entire rest of the game. So, combat is really quick in 5th, and sometimes it can even be too quick. And for going again from 4th, where you have these hour-long battles, to 5th, where I've had battles that last less than a few seconds. Like, they show up, boom, they're dead. Okay, move on. It allows for a lot of really interesting things. It means that combat can flow into the rest of the game really well. That you can kind of go from exploration into combat into exploration. You can kind of mix combat and exploration together. Combat and NPC interaction can work together. There's a really good flow. And the system, while I would argue it doesn't work as well as 13th Age or Numenera for narrative combat, for Theater of the Mind style combat, it works pretty well. My only complaint with that is that it still uses really specific fixed distances for things, and it's hard to narrate that. You mentioned Ray of Frost, where it's really hard to show somebody the effectiveness of Ray of Frost when you're just talking through a fight. Why does that matter? You go, well, that guy's slow. What does that mean? I don't know. Maybe he can hit you, maybe he can't. And I just wrote this would be my shameless plug. I wrote like I think a 6,000 word, 4,000 word, treatise on narrative combat, rules for narrative combat, to try to streamline how that works. And I got rid of the idea of fixed distances and switched over to zone-based combat, which is something that you see in 13th Age and in Fate, because it's easy to say. It's like, well, you're either at the throne DS or you're at the statue, the lower platform with the statues. You can fireball either of those places, and you'll hit 4 people that are in either one. Which one do you want to hit? And now it's like, okay, without having to show anything, it's pretty clear what one can do. But I still think that the speed of combat just opens up the whole game, and it can actually be scary. Like, it means that DMs have to do more. As the guy who promotes lazy dungeon mastering, we have to think about all new lazy things to do, because we generally have a lot more of the game to fill out than we did before. Before it was like you come up with 3 battles and you got 4 hours. You don't really have to add a whole lot. You're just like, what are the scenes that are going to take them from one battle to the next? But at 5th, it's like, well, they might get through this really quickly, so I got to have, I'm working on a mini adventure now, like a one-night adventure, and it's supposed to fill about 4 hours of time, and it's got like 12 rooms, and it's because they might get through those rooms pretty quick, and there better be enough of them to fill out 4 hours, or else it's not really a great adventure. So that's my favorite. I already mentioned my least favorite, which is the difficulty and the lack of utility of the encounter building rules. So I'm going to cheat and do my second least favorite, which might be my first least favorite as well. I don't really have a ranking on them, and that's debilitating effects on boss monsters. Save or suck kind of spells that hit even your big boss guys. They've done some good things like legendary resistance. I'm a fan of just saying it just doesn't work. Once players know that that's an effect, and in my opinion, I try to tell them through narration, this is a legendary creature. You're not sure what kind of effects you're going to be able to land on this guy. So then they're not wasting a bunch of spells. And they like to game it by saying, okay, we know he's got 3 legendary resistances. Let's hit him with 3 big spells and try to get through those so we can actually hit him with something else. They see it as a new system to game. So that works pretty well. The problem is there's other spells that can still totally screw up a boss monster that don't have saving throws. One example is, I think I brought it up earlier, is Force Cage. Force Cage is a spell where as long as they fit inside of a Force Cage, there's no save. They're stuck in a cage. And if you've got, if you can somehow get a monster, or and I think where it's really bad is if you have humanoid boss monsters, bosses. If you have the Tiamat's champion, a big knight who's Tiamat's favored fighter, and you're like, oh, that guy looks bad, Force Cage, and let's clean out everything else and we'll worry about this guy later. That kind of sucks. And as a DM, I like boss monsters to matter, and I like I kind of want to just give them a wand of as I refer to it, the anti-bullshit wand, which is like if they get hit by something that's going to screw them up that badly, they just cast the bullshit wand, and then whatever it is goes away. But they don't really have something like that in there, and it's something I have to deal with. Now, I'll share one other kind of interesting scene that kind of tied into both of these, the flow of combat into exploration, and in how debilitating effects can really change the battle. And it was group when they were like level 13 or 14, they came up against an aboleth, and I looked at the aboleth was like a good balanced thing. It's kind of scary. It can charm people. It can do a lot of really nasty stuff. And I said, so the aboleth showed up, and they go, ooh, Force Cage, right? And he Force Caged the aboleth, and the aboleth had nothing it could do, because no effect that it has can go outside of the cage. I think it had some thralls, and they quickly dismissed the thralls. And then the aboleth started to talk to them, and it started to say things like, I don't hate you, I just want to get the hell out of here. And in fact, I can give you something that will help you fight Tiamat. And they're like, really? What's that? And it says, A, I know about a really powerful weapon that will help you fight Tiamat. And B, how would you like to join the abolithic sovereignty, and you'll get all kinds of interesting intelligence about Tiamat's people, because I've got spies in that organization. And they're like, yeah, so what does that entail? Well, how do we become members of the abolithic sovereignty? Is there like a pin? And he goes, well, no, we have to mind control you. We have to put our tentacles up through your nose and manipulate your brain in a certain way. But then you'll see what we see, and you'll see what they see, and you'll learn all this stuff. And they're like, well, how do we know that they're not all seeing what we're seeing? And it's like, well, Don't worry about that, right? That would be fine. And they're like, so two of the characters are like, yeah, okay, right? So then they dropped the force cage, and the Sovereign came up, and the other guy's like, I'm not watching this, and they turned away while the Aboleth was doing these terrible things to these people, and I realized like that Aboleth won, right? Like he was stuck in a force cage, but through good conversation, he convinced him it was a good idea, and now two of the PCs are permanently part of the Abolithic sovereignty, and everything they see goes back to this vast organization, Faerun-wide organization of criminal undermining stuff. And one guy's like, well, I guess when we're done with T-Man, I'm going to have to kill myself because I can't ever trust myself to not do evil stuff for the sovereignty. And it's just
fantastic.
Yeah, it worked out really well. And it, that never would have happened if that force cage hadn't landed.
Yeah.
So that to me was like a really good example. And now every time, like they're like, ooh, what does the sovereignty have to say? This is the great thing is one of the players has a trick where he can move one of his eyes without moving his other. And whenever the sovereignty comes up, he will do that. Like one of his eyes will move back and forth while the other one doesn't. And that means the sovereignty's in control, right? And it's freaking hysterical. And it cracks everyone at the table up. And then they learn. It's a great role-playing tool for me because I can tell them about stuff, that they never would have seen, because it's this whole new narration tool. And it occurred because of a crappy save or suck spell. So, hence the whole spiky bits and the way it generates a story.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a fantastic example. I love that.
That was good. If anybody watching has questions, we're going to try to take one or two here at the end. And it's not set up like a Q&A, so it's just going to be totally random. So throw in some good questions, and we'll take those. And while you're doing that, my favorite thing about 5th edition is that they've stripped it down. Like, there's nothing that's totally unnecessary about it. They've pretty much stripped away down to like a core game where there's nothing that's just like, why in the world is that entire system part of this? But they've done it in a way that you can easily add in other things. You can easily add in rules from like other games. I think we were talking about a little bit ago. Like I've taken stuff straight from Dungeon Crawl Classics, and with almost no work at all, fit it right in. And so they've built this much more designable game. Like you were saying, the Dungeon Masters are designers and whatnot. So that's my favorite thing about it. And my least favorite is not a very legitimate complaint. I just want more content. But that might also be a strength of theirs, that they're not putting out
it's interesting.
an insane amount of content.
Yeah, I coming from 3rd edition and Pathfinder, I appreciate that the releases are few and far between. Just because I'm like, oh, thank God there's no splat bloat yet. Like I'm so thankful for that. Like I'm so glad that my players aren't like, hey, I'm gonna be this random prestige class from this book that came out 15 years ago and
Shard mind, battle mind. Like,
yeah, exactly.
I don't know what that is.
Yeah.
It always cracked me up that you have to figure out why this guy who's made out of living fire is sitting at a bar having a drink.
Yeah.
I always had a hard time with that.
Yeah, I do have to say that I also feel more comfortable tweaking, like you're saying, Kirk. I feel more comfortable tweaking 5th edition than I think I ever have with D&D before. And it's just really easy to add in those little optional rules, or like fate aspects, using rules from Fate, putting those in there is a really simple sort of plug and play sort of deal. So
I love it.
Yeah,
I think, and then you brought up advantage and disadvantage and how cool that mechanic is, and that's another one where you can tie that to so many different things in a battle to sort of change up the effects. My 4E time taught me a lot about how to make interesting environments, and that was a layer of combat that was always important. But it's so easy to say there's an upper platform. If you're willing to make this DC 15, acrobatics check to climb your way up there, you can get advantage on ranged attacks against people that are down below.
Exactly.
It's so quick to whip something out like that and make the battle more interesting. And it's a powerful ability. Advantage is a really. In fact, my initial complaint about advantage is, oh my God, it's too powerful.
Yeah.
And now I go, well, it's powerful. It's as powerful as I thought it was, but it's really cool.
Exactly.
So just live with it. Yeah.
We've got some good questions coming in. Some of them could take like a whole another hour to go over. So I've got one that came in on a message here that was actually something I totally forgot that I wanted to do. Where do you see 5e going over the next year, or what do you see it as in like 5 years from now? Do you see it being something different? Do you see like the exact same thing, which may not be good business wise, but where do you see it going?
I think the Forgotten Realms Adventurers Guide that's coming out, I think is a pretty good like look at what they're maybe going with, which is mechanics, classes, races, options tied to different campaign settings, which I really like because I enjoy the flavor of the different campaign settings and stuff. And they had a survey, I think it was in September or October, that was what campaign settings do you want to see in 5th edition? And they had, Ravenloft and Spelljammer and Greyhawk and Al-Qadim and all that kind of stuff in there. So what I would like to see is every campaign setting. I want to see 5th edition Dark Sun, and what I think they're going to do, I think they're going to do something like that. And I think that the Forgotten Realms Adventurers Guide is kind of that first sort of foray into that type of splat book.
Where do you see it headed, Mike?
I don't know. I don't know where I see it headed. I know what I would like. I'd say where I see it head, I'll just keep drawing a straight line with what they've done so far. I would expect we'd probably see, sort of a big adventure, kind of a campaign adventure released every 6 months, and then maybe one setting book. I both like and am frustrated by the Sword Coast Adventurers Guide. I like that they sort of picked a region rather than here's the whole Forgotten Realms and now you got to do all this. And instead they said let's pick one place and we're going to pick the Sword Coast. I'm mad that they put it out now and not 2 years ago or a year ago. Like I've now run I've 2 campaigns in the Sword Coast already. That area is well trodden. I mean the Rise of or the Horde of the Dragon Queen literally takes you from the south of the south of the Sword Coast to the north of the Sword Coast. What I wanted that a year ago, and then I would like them to put out a big adventure and a campaign book for a new area, and I'm making this up. I don't have no insider info, but like Tyr, let's pick Tyr from Dark Sun, and here's the guide to survival in Tyr. That's both player and DM focused, and this adventure about and I'm gonna make it up because it was a campaign I ran for my home group, but the resurrection of Kalak the Dragon King, and that would be kind of this fun package where you have a player book that they can build characters on, and they could do psionics in it, and they could do gladiatorial stuff, and there's this adventure that really goes through a big kind of piece of the game and takes characters high. That's kind of what I would like to see. I agree. Like I dipped my toe into Pathfinder and ended up with like 15 books. So I know what it's like to have a system that puts out a lot of content. I don't always know if it's bad, but yeah, it can be bad. It was 4th edition was rough because there was so many classes and so many combinations. One thing that we instituted in my home game is we always, and they actually now do this in the organized play for D&D, that you always had like the basic classes plus this other set, and the set was refined and the set was specific to the kind of adventure we were running. So I used like the Heroes of Shadow book, was the only extra kinds of characters you could have, and it's because we were playing in the Shadowfell. And that kind of helped. It meant that there was a lot of versatility in 4E. Like you could play a lot of different small campaigns in 4E, and all of them felt different. And I think they're kind of doing that in 5th. Like they've said with the organized play program that you can only play with the character options that are available for that setting, for that particular adventure. So the last one was Princes of the Apocalypse, and there was a Princes of the Apocalypse player's guide that had some extra races and I think some modified builds for classes that people could pick. And then the next one, you couldn't use that. Now the problem is they put Out of the Abyss out, and there isn't one for that. Now maybe Sword Coast is it, but Sword Coast isn't out yet, so it's hard to see. But I like that idea. The players don't. Like I had a bunch of people in my organized play game who were like, "What do you mean I can't? I had all this stuff that I just played with and I liked it, and I can't use any of those spells." I'm like, "No, sorry, out of luck." And I just blame WotC and say, "Well, they said no, so I'm just facilitating." So I don't have any sort of big predictions about weird, wild things they're going to do. I think it'd be great if they came out with an Unearthed Arcana that had like all these kind of crazy, further extensions of optional rules. If I were writing it, it would have a big thing about how to run narrative combat really effectively, mass combat, really simplified mass combat system, so you could run giant battles. I think there's a lot of things they could put in there that would be kind of fun.
I would second that. So if anybody's watching from Wizards, let's get on that one.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of optional rules. That's for sure.
Yeah. And the DMG has a lot that are kind of nice.
They do. Yeah, I would love to see more of that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just used a shotgun for the first time in 5th edition last night in a game. So, it does a lot of damage.
Yeah.
2d8, man. It's pretty crazy.
Nice. Well, I think our hour is coming to a close. Before I end it, do you guys have any final thoughts? Anything you want to say? Plug? Anything?
I just want to say it's been great talking with you guys. Mike, it's great to finally meet you and get to talk with you about D&D. And hope everyone's been having a good BrigadeCon. Make sure you go to brigadecon.org and donate to Child's Play. We're doing all of this for charity, and we're raising quite a bit so far. So, yeah. That's what it's all about.
Any last words from you, Mike?
I think there's only one piece of advice I would offer. I'm not a big, I don't know, my whole site is built on advice, but I'm getting less and less interested in advice because we all have our own unique takes on things. But I know that what's worked for me really well in as we talked about all these weird sort of things about 5th is really give it a good shake without house ruling a bunch of stuff. I've avoided house ruling stuff, and I've had a better game because of it. All of my games have been better games because of it, and I would keep doing that. And and I'm a big fan of Child's Play, so definitely donate. And thanks to you both. This has been a great time.
Yeah, thank you both for taking part in it. As always, good to see both of you. Like they said, head over to brigadecon.org. and you can donate to Child's Play. I believe you can also buy T-shirts and hoodies still to get the BrigadeCon logo. This is last year's, but you'll see the new one there, and then proceeds some of that still goes to Child's Play. So head over there, and there's plenty of events still left. We have, 3 hours left in the convention, I think.
Yes.
So, yes.
Yeah, the big event for me is a 3-hour nap before the closing ceremony.
Well, thank you guys for taking part, and thanks everybody for watching. Don't forget to go to the website and check out the other events that are finishing out the night. We will see you guys later.